What's going on, everybody?
Happy Thursday night.
Happy Thursday,
Happy
everyone.
Thursday. Let me go full screen.
There we go.
You guys.
Yep.
Cheers.
Cheers, guys.
Woo.
Nice to see you.
Man, it's been
All
a week.
right. Thursday night live,
Mm.
and we got a great topic tonight.
Is it something about all these bottles on the bar?
Well, it's always about the
It's a
bottle.
good indication, right?
There's a bunch of them, man.
Yeah. But tonight we get to talk about something that we started, kind of hitting at the beginning of the year around American single malts. And, as Scotch for Dummies, we're pretty used to drinking malt
Malted
beverages.
bars.
Yeah. So, and not beer malt beverages, but other than that.
Exactly.
And so when we started to find out about these American single malts, we started getting some and we're like, wow, this is
Spectacular.
This is as Scotch-like as American whiskey is.
Yes.
I mean, and even though I don't know if I would compare any of these to Scotch per se. I mean, because there's so much variety here.
Yeah.
So yeah,
it's been interesting so far tasting through some of the bottles. There's definitely some very unique American things that they're doing.
yes,
like malting with mesquite wood.
yeah,
And using unused casks, brand new casks. So I think that, kind of like Scotch in general, like it's kind of experimental, right? Like they try different things. And I think the American version of that will be very interesting. So I'm looking forward to getting into this.
Yeah, there's a lot to learn, and it kind of, when we started getting into this, it's like the Wild Wild West. Like, what is going on here? Who's this? What's going on? It's kind of like our Scotch journey all over again.
Yeah.
And so we started looking into it more, and we have a special guest tonight that's going to talk about the industry and kind of he kind of founded some things. He's pretty important to the industry. So looking forward to that. But before we begin, let's say a quick hi to our friends in the comments here to join the show.
We have all in. Steve A,
Good to see you, Steve. Tom R.
Kim Rederick,
Very nice. Michael.
and Trevor, and Fish and Shrimp by Rich.
Ah, that's awesome. I love that name.
Yeah, Everwind. Hey, everyone.
Ahoy,
Ahoy,
mates.
Martin and Malt and stuff. And man, there's a lot of
A
people.
lot of people are really excited about drinking their American single malts tonight. It's
They're not
great.
alone. We are as well.
So
Yeah.
everyone's asking about the Peachwood. So we'll see.
Not this evening.
Not this evening, but we'll see.
Trooper, are you actually on the States today? Or are you actually an oil rig?
Oh,
Hopefully he's in the States drinking.
so Michael's got a great Michael Hassard's question. Is this stuff cheaper than Scotch? Well, I think we'll have to
Oh,
ask
that's a
Greg
good question. It's a fair question. Fair question.
Depends on which Scotch you're talking about, I guess.
Greg Lewis is a long time no see, and Zach Andrews.
Oh, somebody's pouring Maltzilla right now.
Well, we poured some.
I believe I don't have that in my glass,
Yeah,
but
we should pour one, sure.
but Drew's drinking
I'm
that.
drinking some right now.
So,
Little Texas whiskey.
so should we find out a little bit more about this single malt stuff from somebody who knows
Well,
more
who do
than
we
we do?
have? Who's coming on?
Yes. So we have Steve Hawley, who's a
Steve
founder and president of the American Single Malt Whiskey Commission.
Wow, cool. Awesome.
So he is got lots of experience. When you found a commission by yourself, well, not by yourself, with others, and then are able to create the definition of a whiskey with a tax trade bureau.
I mean, it had to be hard. It's so
Yeah,
much information.
I bet
to
he
do.
could tell us some.
Maybe we should have him on talk about it. Let's welcome
yeah.
him.
that.
Let's welcome Steve to the show. Hey, Steve.
Gentlemen,
Hello,
how you
Steve.
doing?
Good.
Great.
good.
Thanks for
How about
having me.
yourself?
Absolutely.
well.
So
Yeah,
what's your
I was going to
last-
tell my wife that I was going to be a dummy tonight, but I thought better of that one. Yeah,
Well, she might have just, I don't know. Depends. She might agree with you. I know my wife.
yeah.
does.
I didn't want to hear. I didn't want to hear.
We're all dummies in this world, right?
Comparatively.
Well, thanks for having
speaking.
me. This is going to be fun. So I'm at your disposal here to talk about American single malt and learn you guys a little bit. So
We're excited to have you on the show and learn more about you. I guess a good place to start is kind of just about yourself. Could you give us a little background about yourself to our audience here and let us know what's going on?
yeah, I'll start with the stuff that matters, which is whiskey. So I had several past lives, which are much less interesting. So we'll skip right over that.
Okay.
And in 2009, I was living in Seattle at the time and hooked up with two guys that had this cockamamie idea to make single malt in Seattle. And I said, that's a great idea. I love Scotch whiskey. and yeah, I went on a journey from there. So we started Westland Distillery, which is in Seattle, Washington, and dedicated exclusively to single malts. And we chose single malt for a few different reasons. One, we loved single malt. So why not make something and do something with all of your days that you love doing?
Mhm.
Second thing was, we really wanted to make something that was evocative of the place that we lived. Corn doesn't grow in Seattle, not naturally at least. But you might not know it, but Washington Pacific Northwest is one of the finest barley growing regions in the world. So that made sense to us. And then, honestly, from a business standpoint, we saw the opportunity. We saw the white space in the American whiskey market. We were really the first to talk about American single malt. We certainly weren't the first to make it. These guys were. I would argue they were the first ones. But we were the first ones to really use the term American single malt as a core tenet of our brand and our communications. So that was in 2009, and 2016 we formed the American Single Malt Whiskey Commission. I can tell you a little bit about that story, but the reason that we did it was, we had earned some accolades for the whiskey that we were making and the work that we were doing. We won global craft distiller of the year from Whiskey Magazine, and we were hot shit and thinking good things for ourselves. And then we really started expanding our distribution and realizing that we were selling something that nobody understood. And we were trying to put whiskey into a store that didn't have a space for it, didn't have a category. So we realized quickly that in order for us to be successful individually as a business, as a distillery, that we needed to simultaneously build the category, which was pretty daunting and scary. And our investors were very patient with us when we told them, "Hey, we need some extra marketing money to sell not our brand but an entire category. What do you think?" So we got to thinking, let's get a bunch of people together and let's make this happen. So we reached out to all of our whiskey making buddies, and we said, "Hey, a lot of us are going to be in Chicago." I honestly don't even remember what the conference was, but we were all in Chicago for a conference in March of 2016, and there was a blizzard, and we went to Binny's, which is kind of you guys know what Binny's is. There you go.
Oh yeah.
And you're in Indiana, you know what Binny's is.
I've been to Chicago, so yeah,
anytime.
So I remember literally driving through that store and thinking I'm going to kill myself and never make it. So there were 9 of us. Well, there were 9 distilleries that showed up. There were about a dozen of us around the table, and we set aside like 3 hours, figuring it would take us a good bit of time to hash it out and argue over things. But it took really about 20 minutes for us to sit down and draft what we wanted the definition for American single malt to be. And we can get into all the details about it. I'm happy to answer any questions. But the reason that we wanted to do it was a business reason, but also from a whiskey making standpoint, it was inevitable. This was going to happen. And we figured better for people that make it to decide what it is than somebody else, whether that be the government, a special interest group, whomever, the Scotch Whisky Association, right? Let's do this ourselves before someone else does it for us.
Were there any negotiations, or what was the biggest sticking point of that? I mean, and I got a couple questions here. What was the biggest sticking point that you had that meeting and subsequent meetings? And did the rules change from that first meeting to the time the TTB put it into the register?
Again, there wasn't a ton of debate because, guys, single malt whiskey is obvious. It was important to us to meet the expectations consumers have globally for what single malt is. I mean, there's 3 basic tenets, right? It's made from 100% malted barley. It's distilled at one distillery, and in our case, it's made in America. We have some other things, and I'm happy to get into that, but those were pretty obvious. The work was really in figuring out how it needed to be phrased, because our government talks about whiskey from a regulatory standpoint differently than other governments do. And what we didn't want to do was go to the TTB and ask them to reinvent how they talk about things or how they describe things or how they define things just for our category, because we knew
Right.
they would say no and wouldn't do it, and they would,
Right.
just brush us off and say that's not the way we do things. So it was important for us to kind of draft this in a smart way, to make sure that we were setting ourselves up for success, right? There was a
All right,
couple, we brought a lot of things up. Obviously, the minimum age statement is one that people want to talk about. We talked about it. Everybody agreed that that was not a reasonable thing for America to adopt, but B, the TTB already has rules for how you convey age. So that was a quick discussion. The other clause in our definition that's conspicuously absent is the pot still requirement that you get in Scotland. Of course, the conversation starts with, all right, well, what's the Scottish definition? Because that is the standard.
course,
and
yeah.
all credit to them for building what single malt is, right?
Yeah,
we all got into this industry because we loved Scotch. We love single malt Scotch whiskey. So, tip our hats to them for being the ones to blaze the trail. But we also had to look at the realities of what's happening from a distilling standpoint in the United States. So if you even just step back and think about it, there's close to 3,000 distilleries in this country. 3,000. There's like 119 or something in Scotland, 129. I think it's got
for sure.
I had no idea it was that much. Wow.
Yeah. So, and also keep in mind that I think there's like 10,000 breweries or something like that, maybe even more. 12,000.
That I believe for
and
sure.
And a lot of what we knew was going to happen and what is happening now is that you see brewers starting to dabble in single malt, because we make beer first and then we distill it. So we had to look at the realities of the landscape of US brewing and distilling, and the pot still requirement is in place for Scotch single malt whiskey to maintain the integrity of the grain, to ensure that you can't distill to a high enough proof that there's no grain character left, right? That's why that pot still requirement is there, because physically on a pot still, you can't get up to neutral grain spirits. The United States, again, going back to how things are phrased within the class of whiskey, already has a regulation for that, a maximum distillation proof, which we have in our definition as well. And to suggest to distillers across the country, and even brewers, that they need to throw out the hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars of equipment that they've installed so that they can put a pot still in is not reasonable and not necessary.
Right.
So that's the reason that we left that out. Everything else is really pretty straightforward.
Yeah, the barrels. I like the oak barrels. I think it gives a great. So it has to be in an oak barrel. That's the 700 liters or less. It doesn't have to say new oak. It doesn't have to say used oak. It can be whatever oak you want. I love that idea. It gives great flexibility to that because I know casking is the main variable in Scotch, quite honestly. I mean, the way you can do a cask. So I love that you've added that. The one question I would ask,
that's an interesting topic.
and all of the Scotch people that we know, it's like, but you allow flavoring, and it specifically allows flavoring. So talk to me about the discussion around that.
Yes.
I mean, I know, like Jack Honey and all these big brands have all these flavored whiskeys. Is that kind of the reason you left that in there, or talk to me about that?
We did not include flavoring at all. So just to be clear, our organization is adamantly against what is broadly called adulteration. So colorings, flavoring, and what's called aging materials. So
I thought
we
that was
are
allowed.
adamantly against that. Yes.
Oh,
So that's not in the Scotch whiskey in the American single malt
No.
rules.
No, it's not. It's not in our petition, and hopefully it will not be part of the.
that's good.
But it's not prohibited, right? It's not prohibited.
We have asked the TTB to prohibit it. Yes.
Oh, you
So
Okay.
did. Wow, I missed that.
bourbon in this country is the one, and straight whiskey are the only types. So there's a class of whiskey, and within that class of whiskey,
Mhm.
you have various types: bourbon, rye whiskey, wheat whiskey, straight versions of everything, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Bourbon, when they codified their regulation and their definition, outlawed, prohibited adulteration. We want the same. So a lot of people are confused by this because the
Yes,
TTB issued a very long treatise
yeah.
on what this is, what it's about, where it's come from, who we are, what we're asking for, and what they ultimately are proposing. They have proposed everything that we've asked them to propose. Now, after that definition that they've proposed, they posed a series of questions.
Okay.
So what happens is we petitioned to have what's called a standard of identity added to the federal code of regulations. And after a long period of time and subsequent, ongoing petitions,
Yeah.
to say it nicely, in July of last year, they finally published their proposed rule. With any law, there is what follows is a public comment period.
Mhm.
So there is a 90-day public comment period to the end of September, and they posed a number of questions, which we answered. And we also, saw questions from far and wide, from individuals to
Sure.
trade organizations to distilleries and what have you. So the good thing is that they asked that question: should coloring, flavoring, and blending materials be allowed? If they hadn't asked that question, and someone brought up that question in the public comment period, we would have gone all the way back to the beginning of the whole process and
Oh my
started
God,
over.
are you kidding me?
So,
That sounds right.
I'm grateful to them for including that. And in our formal response, which you can read in the public register, we gave our reasons why we didn't want adulteration to be included, why we wanted it to be prohibited, just like it is with bourbon. Now, this is where it kind of gets interesting, because again, and I'm rambling. If you guys want to stop me,
No,
this
go
is
ahead.
great.
This is a great question. Yeah.
Again, there's a specific way that the U.S. government phrases things. There's, the regulations are ordered in a certain way. They have a section about adulteration.
Mhm.
The easiest and most expeditious thing would be to just take it at face value and either say it's allowed or it's prohibited. The hard thing would be to get in a discussion about what should be allowed and what shouldn't be allowed, right? So basically, our perspective is we don't want any of those things. We don't want any of those things because we believe it puts us as a category, American single malt, at a disadvantage globally. And the last thing we need is other regions around the world pointing at us saying, yeah, those American single malt guys, be careful with that. There's all kinds of funny, crazy,
agree.
weird things happening in those bottles.
Right.
This is the real stuff. That's what we don't want.
Exactly.
Right.
What we told them, though, in our formal response was, if this is a topic that you feel needs to be discussed and debated, and the most important thing is to ratify a definition. If that includes adulteration, we would be disappointed, but we'll live with that and we'll petition the day after to eliminate that
I
and
see.
go through that process.
Okay.
So this is where it gets interesting, right? And I'm on Scotch for Dummies, so I'm going to try and be on my best behavior and say nice things about Scotland. But what is the Scotch Whisky Association's point of view on adulteration?
Coloring only.
Can you guys guess? Yeah. Oh, no adulteration. We don't want that, except for caramel coloring, right?
We don't mind that at all.
And
We don't
there's
mind
no
that at
limit
all.
on how much sherry you can leave in the barrel before you add the whiskey to it. So
There's some grayness there.
yeah, there's gray there.
Yeah.
Too.
So again, what I think would be a deep dark rabbit hole is for the world of whiskey to start debating what's adulteration and what's not.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
for sure.
And that has been established in the regulations. And for us, we've been waiting. We've been doing this for 7 years. We've been waiting for this. The last thing I want is for it to be
Start over. Yeah.
put on hold because there's a debate about adulteration. So do I want adulteration to be allowed? No, I don't. If they feel that needs to be a yes instead of a no, I'm still going to sleep happy at night that we got this done. And then I'll wake up in the morning and start drafting my petition to eliminate it.
Yeah. Okay.
Well,
okay. Because now that was my question, because everything I read said that the current proposal is to allow it. So I didn't have your response. So that makes sense. And I think everybody that is online would agree that please don't adulterate it, because there's so many flavored whiskeys out there that they have their own niche and they're very popular and they make tons of money, but it's not that single malt kind of like higher level.
Well, and I agree with you. I think that would definitely hurt us on the world market. And
for sure.
I personally would want people to look at American single malt and say that's a quality beverage. Like, you can trust that.
Yeah.
It's going to be good. And I think you lose something if you don't do that. So, but it also might be like Scotch, where you've got some people that non-chill filter, no coloring, and they proudly put it on the bottle, and then you've got other people that are like, well, there's whiskey in here.
and look, guys, there's good whiskeys made that are chill filtered.
Yep.
No,
Absolutely.
It is one of the things that was important to us was that we leave flexibility in the definition for people to be creative and people to be innovative. That's what we have to offer as a category, as Americans.
Absolutely.
And I think a lot of people. I'm going to say something nice about the Scotch Whisky Association. You ready? A lot of people badmouth the Scotch Whisky Association and the rules, and they say they're too strict. They're too strict. And it's funny. One of the things I was thinking of earlier is when you brought up the oak provision.
Mm-hmm.
It was right about when we were meeting. It was right about the time when the Scotch Whisky Association said that, okay, you can use tequila casks, and like people shouted from the mountaintops about how wonderful that was. And to us, it was just kind of, we were snickering at it. It's like, you can use whatever you want. Like, who cares as long as it's oak? Like, why is that some major thing? But here's my perspective on this, that the Scotch Whisky Association and the regulations, the rules, the definition that's in place is not restrictive necessarily. What's restrictive in Scotland is tradition. Right?
Oh yeah.
They're not prohibited from doing a lot of the things that American single malt whiskey producers do, or Australian single malt whiskey producers do, or Indian whiskey producers. It's just not in their tradition, and a lot of Scotch whiskey is very much tied to history. Right? I make whiskey this way because my father did before me, and his father before him. And look. They make great whiskey. There's no arguing that. There's no problem with that. They can't make enough to keep up with demand. There's no incentive or motivation for them to change the formula of what they're doing.
That's true.
But in America, there's every incentive to do that. I would say almost all of our members work hard to put their own stamp on single malt and to open their minds to possibilities. You talked about mesquite smoke, for instance, at the top here.
Mhm.
You know, it's not really in our best interest as a category to just copy Scotch whiskey. Why is that
Absolutely.
interesting? You know,
Exactly.
I think that's one
so
thing I'm going to bring up too. Is one of the things that as we've explored Scotch whiskey in general, it's just the regions, right? And you start, it's muddied now a little bit more, but it used to be so kind of flavor profiled in this sense, right? Isla, Speyside, sweet, etc. And one of the things about American single malt that I'm looking forward to is the American version of that. Like, you know, obviously you can play around with mesquite and other things, but like it would be great to start figuring out like, okay, you know, Northwest, you're going to start getting this, or you're going to get more on the East side. You're going to get, you know, I don't know, things like that. It'd be really cool to see American single malt evolve into that kind of a situation so that you start seeing kind of that flavor American coming out and these whiskeys.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I question that though, only in that Americans are really creative. And so, you know, one distiller in Texas is going to have 40 different single malts because they're trying different casks, they're trying different heat temperatures, they're taking their casks and they're going to take their cask and move it to Seattle to age it because they want to try that out.
Okay,
and you're going to get for a while, I think you're going to get an explosion of good and bad whiskey. I think there's a significant potential that some of those casks are going to be terrible. And now whether those make it to the market, I guess would probably be a business decision, which probably isn't good, but the creativity makes good and bad. And so it's going to be interesting to see.
But you can't find that next cool thing unless you experiment.
Exactly.
So to me, the American single malt category is kind of where like California wines were in like the 50s and 60s, right? And it's kind of a gunslinger
all the time.
Yeah. And you know, they ended up beating the French wines, you know, and they came out of left field because they were trying things that were new and being creative. And
I did a whole campaign at Westland based on the Judgment of Paris. And, you know, the California wines didn't go over there with copies of French wine. They went over there with something distinct, you know, and that's what we're trying to do here. The regions is interesting. I have a lot of things to say because I started looking at the comments here and comment about
quite a few.
the litigious nature of the SWA. Look, I want to make it clear that the commission isn't here to regulate quality. That's not our role. That's not my role. Yeah, that consumers vote with their wallets. It's their job to decide what's good and what's not.
Yeah.
And I do think that there's been some overreaching in other regions where, you know, there's some protectionism about quality, but quality is subjective. So, and as long as I'm kind of getting a little spicy here, I want to touch on this regions thing because this comes up all the time. Are there going to be American regions like there are in Scotland? And there's even internal debate. I mean, you two disagreed,
Yeah,
right? And that happens in our group all the time.
Yep.
What I don't want to do is fabricate regions if it evolves naturally. And I can speak to a few things that I do think are happening. I think that's fine. I think that's great. I think the Scotch whiskey regions is a whole lot of baloney. It's a marketing ploy.
Especially
I mean,
now.
The reality is they're all getting their grain from the same place. They all use the same yeast. That grain, that barley's mostly coming from Eastern Europe. So, I mean, what kind of regional imprint is there? You know, we talked before we got on about angles of wine arms and things like that everybody wants to talk about. I mean, what's distinct from distillery to distillery is the choices that people make. Can you reflect place in whiskey? I believe 100% yes. I don't necessarily think that most Scotch whiskeys are trying to do that. And I think their regions were certainly a marketing, you know, effort that worked wonderfully. I mean, you can't go into a pub, even in America, without a placemat with the regions on it in front of you. So it's worked for them, but from a whiskey standpoint, it's pretty suspect.
I think the only thing I think I totally agree with you, especially in the marketing discussion part of it, especially, and even Sean, you mentioned now how everything is kind of muddied in a sense, but you can't argue weather and certain environment patterns too, like with the ocean shores versus not. I mean, there's some, and maybe this is my ignorance and distilling. I don't know, but
there's a lot of debate about the whole brininess thing, and a lot of Scotch whiskey distillers that will tell you that, you know, aging by the ocean's a whole bunch of horseshit.
Really, no
You know,
kidding.
it's yeah, and a lot of seasoned, senior, respected people will have that point of view, and I'm not going to open that can of worms. And there's no right or
I
wrong.
want you to. This is one of my favorite interviews already. I love this. This is great.
There's no right or wrong answer to this. I mean, and again, things are subjective. You know, how much is, you know, is projecting. I love to blind taste whiskey because I don't want to know. I don't want to see the label. I don't want to see a big giant ocean wave on a Talisker bottle and be like, this is briny.
Ooh, it was briny
because I saw the wave, right?
Yeah.
So
Right.
I think that even those things aside, this is one of my favorite topics, and what I think is interesting about single malt whiskey. And you've already brought up Texas and Seattle, right? I mean, you couldn't be two different climate, you know, two more
Absolutely.
different climates.
Yeah.
And are there microclimates in Scotland? Yes, of course there are. Is there a great difference from one region to another? No, it's all, you know, it barely,
It's
the
cold and
temperature
rainy.
barely breaks a 20-degree window, right? Higher
Yeah,
or
yeah.
lower.
Right.
So I think that what is really interesting about single malt in America is even if we replicated the techniques and brought over the same equipment, there's such a wide range of climate realities in this country that that's already going to unfold this, you know, really interesting exploration into what does single malt look like when it's done in Texas? What does single malt distilled in Texas and aged in Seattle, like you said, mean? You know, 2 years in Texas, 2 years in Seattle. So I think that stuff's wildly interesting, and I think it's going to open a lot of eyes and make for a lot of fun tasting for people.
I think it's going to end up like barbecue, right?
Yeah.
You get, you know,
That's
I
a
mean,
really good analogy.
you get a few different styles in random regions. You know, in 100 years they can talk about it, right? Like,
Yeah.
it's not going to be next year. It's
No,
going to be
it's gonna
a
be a long
long
time.
time from now when it gets sorted out. But I feel like the number of different climates and the altitudes and there's so many different variables in the United States versus a lot of other countries that they can
100%.
just in aging, it'll be amazing.
Yeah.
It'll be a lot of
agree.
fun.
And I think what is emerging now, or let's say what has emerged to date, has been more cultural than climate based. I think you see in the Pacific Northwest, you see a lot of craft brewing influence. So you see different types of malts. You see brewer's yeast being used. You go to, you know, I think you guys have a bottle of whiskey Del Bach there. You know,
Yep.
Yep.
they've got mesquite smoke because that's kind of evocative of their place. I think you see on the eastern seaboard, you see a little bit more of a traditional approach and flavor profile, something that's probably closer to Scotch in profile. So, but those things are choices. I mean, whiskey, you know, I mentioned, you know, where do Scotch whiskey, you know, distilleries get their grain from? It's largely not from Scotland, right? So,
Yeah.
and that's fine. You know, the global grain economy is driven by Budweiser. You know, it's like,
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
So
so
true. Yeah.
so the reality is you can do anything anywhere. If you want to pay for the freight, you can get
Yeah, true.
anything to Indiana and make whatever you want there. You can make whatever kind of equipment you want. You can get whatever kind of raw
Yeah.
ingredients you want, and you can make it there. And I think that's great. I think people should have the freedom. I mean, fuck, this is America, right? I mean, you should
Yeah,
have the
absolutely.
freedom. You know, wave the
Hell
flag
yeah.
here. I mean, you should have the freedom to do what you want. And I think that if we as a category, and certainly if we as a commission, tried to arbitrarily draw lines and make a map of regions and say to, you know, say to Stephen at Whiskey Del Bach, you have to do this because that's your region, you know, that's ridiculous. What if he wants to try something
Right.
else?
Yeah.
What if he wants to,
Right.
you know, at Westland, everything that's peated right now, which I saw early in the comments, everything that's peated right now is from a local peat bog, which has a totally different character.
Oh my
But
God.
for the first several years, that was not possible. So we brought in Baird's peated malt from Scotland. So, and where did that grain come from? Who knows? Probably not Scotland, probably Poland. So I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think that's totally valid. And if someone wants to try something totally different that isn't necessarily evocative of their place, that's fine. They shouldn't have to be restricted. So
That seems fair.
Yep.
So I'm kind of curious. Your job basically is to grow this beverage category.
Mhm.
So are you going out and trying to recruit some of these 3,000 distilleries onto your American single malt crusade, or are you just kind of advising people that are thinking about getting into that and want to try it out and see what's available? Or is it more marketing the category to let the ones that are there grow and let people come on board if they want to?
yes.
So
Excellent.
Is the whiskey
So
connection, is it lots of people, or are you like one of a few? How does that?
You mean our organization?
Yes.
You're looking at it.
All right.
Yeah.
Great. All right.
Yeah. I mean, we have a board that's largely made up of the founding distilleries, but we've
Yeah.
added a few since then that have raised their hands and said we want to be more involved. Stephen at Whiskey Del Box, a great example. He's on our board, so he advises and helps out, and he's raises his hand when we need to do an event, and if he needs to fly across the country, he'll go do it. So we have people that are helping out. We have teams at distilleries that will donate their time. I don't do the social media. Someone from Virginia Distillery, Becca, does that. So
Oh, nice.
people help out, but it's an all volunteer situation. What are we trying to do? Yeah, we're trying to recruit people in it. We're trying to encourage people to make single malt because that's the best thing to make. Why wouldn't you?
Absolutely.
So
Not going to argue with it.
we've got 100 plus or minus a couple members right now. I know personally of 250 distilleries that are making single malt whiskey in this country. You bet your ass I'm reaching out to those other 150 on a regular basis saying, why aren't you signing up? What's the delay? Join us.
Right.
I think that what you'll see when the definition is ratified shortly, I think what you'll see is a boom in single malt. I would imagine that fairly quickly we'll double that 250 to about 500, making some amount of single malt. That could be a cask a year, but I think you'll see a lot of people jump into it. I think you'll see the people that are making it currently start to make a lot more of it. The vast majority of our members aren't exclusively single malt distilleries. They make other things as well. I think you'll see a lot more investment in that. You're already seeing the big boys. All the big boys are making single malt. All but two of them are represented in the commission, and you can bet your ass that I've been knocking on the door of the two that are.
Yeah.
Are you sharing like advice on some of these distilleries that don't make it yet, or wanting to make it and trying to get their stuff out?
Yeah, absolutely. I got a call the other day from a distiller who had moved from Virginia and is working at a new distillery and trying to convince his ownership to go down the American single malt route. So he reached out to me. I gave him what I could, and this comes down to or comes back to that question of data, which I guess the audience didn't hear us talking about before we jumped on. But there's a lack of data because first of all, the category doesn't exist. It's
right.
It's not a thing officially. The vast majority of people that are making it just by the numbers, not by the volume, but by the numbers, are independent distilleries that don't report or need to report any of their numbers. The data that's out there is from organizations like IWSR. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but that's kind of a self-reported thing and is notoriously kind of more rough edges type of data. So it's really concrete. I'll take the opportunity to browbeat my membership. The best thing that we can do as an organization is to provide that data.
Right.
Well, yeah,
Absolutely.
that's what I was saying.
Yeah.
You know,
And I ask
if this is
every
a niche
week.
market, if this is a niche market and I can only sell a barrel a year, why would I invest? I mean, that's the kind of thing that if there are truly large distillers that are doing it and they're selling, you know, cases and cases and cases of this, and you can get a premium for it because it's a unique, you know, a premium brand or a premium, you know, style. That's what we need to know. Yeah.
And look, there is data that demonstrates that this is the fastest growing category of whiskey in America, which is a great thing and has been for the last couple of years and will continue to be. But what we need is our membership. If anybody's listening, to complete the damn survey and give me the information so that when you guys ask and when journalists ask and when the TTB asks, I can say, this is what you're investing in. This is what you're supporting. This is what you're writing about. This is why this is important. This is how many jobs it serves. This is how much grain we buy. You know, all that kind of stuff is wildly important. But it's like, you know, you can imagine it's like pulling teeth. You know, this is not everybody's main priority from a administrative standpoint. You know, they've got fermenters bubbling over. You know what I mean? It's like they're
I know exactly what
giving me the data I'm asking for is not on the top of their to-do list.
Yeah, when we first started doing this American Single Malt early in the year, I was able to pull some data on craft distillers, which is I'm sure American Single Malt is a tiny portion of craft distillers because I think like Tito's is a craft distiller technically by their whatever the rule is. So
don't get me started on the word craft, but
yeah. So there are more craft distillers by volume, by employee, by brand than there are in all of Scotland. So craft distillers in the U.S. is a larger industry than all of Scotch whiskey. So and so American Single Malt, while maybe a very small portion of that, has potential to really grow, I think.
Yeah. Real quickly, there's a question. Is there a place we can go to sign a petition? Yes.
Yeah.
You can go to americansinglemaltwhiskey.org and just sign up to be a supporter. You can select that you're a distiller, you're a trade member, or you're just a general consumer. And that matters. The TTB wants to see industry consensus and consumer support. So the more numbers that we can have, you know, all you're doing is giving me your email and you're on the mailing list. That's the petition, right?
We can definitely help with that.
Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah, we do.
Just go to the website, sign up. I'm going to be busy tomorrow uploading everything to MailChimp, but yeah, I mean, and
so what's the website again?
americansinglemaltwhiskey.org.
americansinglemaltwhiskey.org. Okay. So we'll put that into the chat to make sure people can get it later and things like that. American Single Malt Whiskey Commission. Okay, great. All right. What a question. So we were talking to some members earlier in a live chat, and we were talking about some of the key, really important questions like, are you going to 700 centiliter? Are you recommending that? I know you're not a distillery, but is that where the industry is going, to the 700 or 70 centiliter bottle, or are you going to stay with 750?
Well, the third thing that I was going to mention earlier about what I think we're going to see as soon as this definition is ratified, you're going to say, oh, look at that. It's scrolling. Wow. Yep. You guys are good.
Tech guy.
Yeah, look at this. You're going to see producers that are making it make more of it. You're going to see new entrants, and you're going to see more export happen. Yeah, okay. I think that's inevitable, and will come quickly. So yeah, I personally, as someone that worked at a distillery for a long time, yes, we were moving to 700s. Absolutely. Okay. I mean, at Westland we exported to, I want to say, a dozen overseas markets. Just from a logistics standpoint, having to bottle things in two different sizes is a nightmare. It's such a headache. It's you're opening yourself up to making mistakes. People make mistakes. You send the wrong size to the wrong place. It's just silly. So yeah, I can tell you from some of my other whiskey exploits that I've been working on and talking to glass manufacturers that we won't see a big move towards that until the big guys make the shift.
Right.
No,
Because the
sure.
big guys making the shift will inevitably be the tipping point to availability.
Yeah.
So if you're a small craft distiller and you want a stock bottle from XYZ supplier and you want it in 700s, they don't have it
Mhm.
because they're not stocking it yet because the big guys aren't making it worth their while. So yeah, they some of those organizations have factories overseas, and if you want to pay a ton of money to make it more complicated, then yes, but it will happen. Everybody will move to 700s. The trade is resisting, but
It'll happen.
it'll happen.
Yeah, if it's a global, because what is it? U.S. and South Africa are the only two countries that have it.
Seems
Thanks,
right.
Tom, for that.
Yeah.
That's a paid comment.
Look,
right
hey,
there.
that's a good point. That's a good point. I'll actually address it. I think
Okay.
Jack Daniel's releasing an American single malt is a good thing. I think that that brings more visibility to what we're doing. It brings more validity to it.
Yeah.
And I would suggest that as long, the more people that are making good whiskey, the better. So in the category. So I don't have any problem with the big boys getting into it. And again, all the big boys are involved because they own, we sold Westland to Remy Cointreau. Remy Cointreau is, what, the fourth largest spirits company in the world or something.
Yeah.
Diageo is represented. Proximo is represented. Bacardi is represented.
Big
So
ones. Yeah.
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, that brings visibility and legitimacy to the category. I think it's great. I hope to God that they make good whiskey and that they don't,
Ruin the brand. Yeah.
they don't kind of tarnish their
Keep it-
reputation. But that's not
Yeah.
for me to decide. It's not for the commission to decide. And
No.
every category has a range of price points and a range of qualities, which again is subjective, and a range of approaches to marketing and presentation and whiskey making. I think the more the better. Absolutely.
So what I see, so you're suggesting that the American Single Malt Whiskey Commission is going to be a primarily communication, marketing, influence tool, and not a regulatory body. You're not planning to regulate.
That's the TTB's job, not mine.
So you don't need to do that. Okay.
I'm not gonna police my membership. I make them sign a pledge that they adhere to not only the definition that we've outlined, but we have you can see it on the website. It's scrolling across the bottom. We have a transparency platform, that we ask all of our members to adhere to. So, look, guys, this is an honor system. I'm not going to spend my days flying around and doing
He got time.
mass spectrometer, data science on people's whiskey and police
He'll
them.
do it for you.
Yeah, there you go.
I'm looking
I mean,
for
that is
spec from my garage.
Once the TTB defines this category, that's their job. And there are people out there right now. I know of several, and I've spoken to them, that are putting American single malt whiskey on their bottle that is not single malt whiskey.
Okay.
And it's the TTB's job to tell them they can't do that and not approve their label.
That's another quick question. With the E or without the E in whiskey? What does the commission recommend?
Or do they care?
You don't care.
Well, the commission doesn't recommend anything. So I can tell you what I think.
Well, okay. What do you think, and what are you pushing for when you?
Well, I think it doesn't matter. First of all,
Okay.
I think it's kind of a silly argument to be having. It's funny. Do you guys know Joshua and Jason, who run Single Cask Nation and do the One Nation Under Whiskey podcast? They do these incredibly long 3-hour podcasts, which are exhausting but fun. And then they've committed themselves to doing kind of an in the news podcast they've committed to be 30 seconds long. and they did a whole podcast on American single malt whiskey. And they were right on the 29th minute. They had covered everything. You know, they had done a wonderful job of raising the topics and discussing them. And then Joshua says, E or no E. And they went way over their 30-minute timeline and talked about that for 10 minutes. Like, what does it matter, guys? Who cares? At Westland, we chose to use an E. We thought that was American, and we wanted to be American. But
we only asked because
doesn't-
we had
it
a
doesn't
couple
matter.
bottles with and without, and I said
I would
IE,
say personally,
so.
the only thing that I have a visceral reaction to is the parenthetical E. I hate that. Like, just pick the E or
Pick
don't.
one.
I don't care. But
Pick one,
I think it looks ugly. But that's just
It
me.
does. Yeah.
I'll agree with that
I
for
agree
sure.
too.
The commission will have no stance on that.
Right.
So will the regulation have a stance on it though? Will the regulation define it?
The
with
TTB does not use an E in all of their regulations for whiskey.
Oh, really?
But they sometimes do the parenthetical thing in other documentation and letters. I think if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure in the proposal they use the parenthetical thing. So guys, it doesn't matter. It doesn't.
No, that seems like something.
It doesn't have any impact of what's in the bottle at all.
But what I see is some people hitting, like if the regulation says no E, I could put an E on it and then I don't have to follow the rules. But maybe not. Maybe that's
no. They do stipulate that you can spell it either way.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, the question
Now we started a fight in the comments too. It's awesome.
Here we go.
Yeah. They'll get our commenters going.
Yeah.
That's the thing they're gonna die on right there.
Comments. What does Steve have in his glass tonight? All right. So I know a lot of people know some of the big boys.
Yep.
So one of the comments that I wanted to make, and I know we're running short on time, but
We're fine.
We can go on. We can go on if you talk.
we've been doing this for 7 years, and I'll admit there were times in the early days when I would have a panel or a tasting, and we'd have 8 American single malts, and 3 or 4 of them were pretty suspect. And now, every time I do a tasting, they're all fantastic. They really are. And look, there's always going to be, in any category, Scotch whiskey included,
Absolutely.
there's always going to be good things and bad things, and there's always that subjectivity. But let me just show you a few of the things that I pulled out tonight, because all of these are fantastic and not super well known. I showed you the McCarthy's bottle. This is a special bottle that Joe, the distiller, sent me. This is a PX sherry cask finished single malt.
Sounds wonderful.
Made in Oregon. I started the night with Rua single malt, which is from Great Wagon Road Distillery in Charlotte.
Okay.
Really impressed with
Looks
the stuff.
delicious.
Like it a lot. My good friend Murphy is freaking brilliant and making wonderful whiskey in Iowa. It's called the Quintessential Cedar Ridge American single malt. These guys, it's funny, they sell more bourbon than anybody in Iowa, including Maker's Mark, including the big boys.
Wow.
Which is an impressive feat. But
I would say so.
It's, no matter where you are, that's an impressive.
You've got a huge distribution network in Iowa. It's
Mike
really
says
got
Total Wine has a lot of bad Scotch.
Yes, they do. Yes, they do.
What was I saying about this? But I was saying that Murphy, the head distiller there, if he had the choice, all he would make is single malt all day long.
Oh, nice.
So highly recommend this guy. Deer Hammer, these guys are out of Colorado. This is a bottle that they sent me. I get a lot of good stuff, which is nice.
It's always nice.
That isn't on the shelf. So these guys are in Buena Vista, Colorado, Deer Hammer. They're doing interesting things. We've talked about Texas. I'm saving this for last because it's peated, which I love. These guys are Andalusia.
Oh yeah.
Texas. They're doing really great things as well.
Yeah.
All of these bottles, guys, are great, and I'm glad nobody's brought up age, because that's a stupid conversation to have.
Yeah,
these guys are all. Do these taste like Scotch single malts? No, they don't.
No.
That's what's interesting about them. But they are genuinely fantastic pours. They really are.
So
And
what
so
do you
these are some
recommend
of the best guys doing it.
For those of us that are in a market that's either hard to get whiskeys or a controlled state? What do you recommend for us to be able to get to these whiskeys, to be able to, support the market? How do we get them?
Well,
We just go,
there's a lot of online marketplaces popping up, and you're going to see more and more and more of that. So this bottle I got off Sealbox. Cedar Ridge is on there as well. I know.
Okay.
A
what is
lot
it,
of
Steel Box?
distilleries are now having their own online shops, and they just kind
Okay.
of. It's
They're
not
shipping.
super apparent to the consumer that they're not actually buying from the distillery. They're buying from a company that works with a retailer in a state that will send it to you. So
Yeah, that's
it's very
fair.
convoluted and very complex. And hopefully,
Yeah.
within 10 years, that whole thing gets turned on its head
Mainstream.
because it needs to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And all the wholesalers in the group here can start lambasting me in the comments, but it's inevitable. It's gonna happen because consumers like you guys want it to happen. You're like, why can't I get this stuff
Absolutely.
easier?
Well, and
Well, and as a
Absolutely.
restaurant, I can tell you it's a horrible pain
yeah,
to try and get stuff that they don't offer in your state. And I've got customers that want to buy that stuff. So it's a pain for businesses too.
Yeah,
So
100%.
yeah, the whole from prohibition era laws probably needs to be updated a little bit.
yeah.
You would think so, but
Are you able to get into like top 10 American single malt whiskeys in Whiskey Advocate and all the whiskey magazines to try and communicate the brands that are out there that are making good whiskey that I would never have heard of Cedar Ridge or Deerhammer in Indiana?
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned that. One of the things that is kind of in our remit here is working with whiskey competitions to lobby them to have American single malt categories, and we've actually been really successful at that. A lot of the publications have given me this. They've written about it, which is the most important thing. There's article. My good friend Clay from the New York Times wrote a great article a couple days ago. Look it up. Clay Risen. Just do New York Times American single malt, and it'll come up. They're doing a great job covering the emergence of this category, but for some reason, a lot of these publications will stop at having an American single malt category in their review section at the back of the magazine, and I don't understand why. And the answer that I get is, well, when it's an official category, we'll start doing it. I'm like, it's a category if you say it is, guys. Like, you're one of the arbiters of
Sounds like
whiskey in the country, and it's like, just do it. You don't have to wait for Uncle Sam to give you permission. So, and I find the same thing with retailers. We were talking before the thing about retailers and going in, and you say, do you have any American single malts? And they raise an eyebrow and they say, I don't know what you're talking about.
Exactly.
And I don't have it. I've been several times into a retailer and they'll say, well, we don't have any American single malt. And I say, yes, you do. Come here. And I take them by the hands. Maybe not actually, because that's a little awkward, but I walk them around their own store. I walk them around their own store and I say, here's an American single malt in the bourbon section. Here's the American single malt in the local section. Here's an American single malt in the Scotch section. Here's an American single malt in the other section.
They have no clue.
You've got them here.
Yeah.
You just need to put them together and put them right in between the Scotch whiskey aisle or column and the world whiskey column, and boom, there you go.
It's really not hard. A study. It's not hard. You go in a liquor store and you see a malt. It's marketing. They know what they're doing. Just put a category that says American single malt and start putting pieces in there, and it will grow over time. I mean, it will get there.
That is really good.
And Melissa,
we just did a study with Total Wine where we did a virtual shelf study, and it showed that not only did their American single malts skyrocket in purchase, but it raised other categories as well. and it raised
Really?
their total ticket out the door with customers. So,
Nice.
So
it
they were
makes
actually
total sense.
buying extra bottles just because they saw.
They were buying more expensive things.
right.
That's awesome.
Nice.
I would think in those terms too, just because of the bourbon. I've got plenty of friends that are just bourbon nuts, and they go. The market's crazy right now, obviously, but you would think at some point they're going to get burned out, but they're still interested in the whole whiskey consumption. This is another, and let's be honest, we talked about this with our patrons before the show. It's also an American thing to do, right? It's bourbon, etc. I mean, American single malt has American in the name of it. I mean, how much more patriotic can you get? So I think there is an easy turn, if you will, from bourbon to this. And it's just one of those things that's like, hey guys, get off your corn bandwagon and look at what's really good over here. Is more variety, other things going on. We just need to get people to shift from that. I think it's inevitable. It's going to happen.
Yeah, I definitely have a strong opinion on it. It would be a great thing to end on because, I think it's really the point. And real quickly, will American blended malts emerge? 100%. Absolutely. I see that tradition coming. Independent bottling already happening. Those those traditions will follow 100%.
That's great.
But I think that, at Westland, for instance, when we went over to France and said, we sell American single malt whiskey, they said, oh, cool, interesting. Tell me about how you make it. And let me ask you all these nerdy questions. When you say to someone here in the States that walks in the tasting room, for God's sakes, and you say, we make American single malt, they say, I don't know what you're talking about. And then you start talking about bourbon. What do you know about whiskey? Do you know bourbon's made from corn? No, I didn't know that. Where do you keep the potatoes? I got that question all the time.
Are you kidding
so
me?
There's definitely there was, I will say this, there was 10 years ago when we started this, a real dearth of knowledge. But you go over to Europe, they've lived with whiskey their whole lives. They understand it. You don't have to explain a lot to them. They drink it when they're kids, it's just part of the culture. Here, it wasn't that long ago, guys, that we were all drinking vodkas and Cosmos. Well, I wasn't, but most people were.
Zima,
Zima, wine coolers,
whatever. But it's been quite remarkable to watch the pace at which the American consumer is learning. They're learning fast, and there's people like you guys that just live next to each other doing stuff like this. Like this never would have happened 10 years ago.
That's true.
That's
true.
So, I mean, the level of education is rapidly increasing, and I think that is great for American single malt. I do believe that there is a great bourbon lake coming, and I think that there is going to be an end to this blind chase for any bottle of bourbon out there, and I'm not even going to open it. I'm going to hold on to it and sell it, and all this nonsense that's happening.
Well said.
And I think that people are going to look for unique flavor profiles and look to see what's interesting, and that's going to happen soon. And American single malt is a great place to turn for that.
Absolutely,
a great place.
We agree.
Yeah,
well, we are 100% on board with this. We are obviously we're Scotch for Dummies, but that's because we didn't know what we're doing back then. we love what we're doing right now, and we love American single malt. And I'm telling you what, we're super, super excited. So thank you so much for being part of this show.
Thanks for having me, guys. It's super fun.
Our guys, I'm telling you right now, we're going to hear about this for weeks. It's like, can we get Steve back on, please? So we'd love to have you back.
Anytime. In Indiana, we'd love to meet you in person.
I will take you up on that, and I'm happy to be on anytime. This is fun stuff for me to do.
This is just the beginning, my friend. So here's to American single malt and
cheers, guys.
Sláinte.
Cheers.
3, 2, 1.